The Trojan War stands as one of the most legendary conflicts in ancient history, a war that exists at the crossroads of myth, poetry, and possible historical truth. Its story has been passed down for nearly 3,000 years, primarily through epic poems, oral traditions, and later historical interpretations. Although many details of the Trojan War are wrapped in myth and divine intervention, scholars believe that the legend may be rooted in a real conflict that took place in the late Bronze Age, around the 12th or 13th century BCE. The war is most famously recorded in Homer's epic poem, the Iliad, which does not narrate the entire war, but focuses on a short period near its end. To understand the Trojan War, one must begin long before the first sword was raised, in a world where gods walked among mortals and fate ruled all. In ancient Greek tradition, the origins of the Trojan War are traced back to a divine dispute that began on Mount Olympus. The gods and goddesses of Greek mythology were invited to the wedding of Peleus, a mortal king, and Thetis, a sea nymph. However, Eris, the goddess of discord, was deliberately excluded from the celebration. Enraged by this slight, Eris sought revenge by throwing a golden apple into the gathering. Inscribed on the apple were the words, "To the fairest." This simple act sparked a fierce rivalry among three powerful goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Each claimed the apple for herself, believing she was the most beautiful. Unable to resolve the dispute, Zeus, the king of the gods, refused to judge between them. Instead, he appointed Paris, a Trojan prince known for his fairness, to decide which goddess deserved the golden apple. Each goddess attempted to bribe Paris with extraordinary gifts. Hera promised him power and dominion over vast kingdoms. Athena offered wisdom and unmatched skill in war. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, promised him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Ultimately, Paris chose Aphrodite, a decision that would seal the fate of Troy. The woman promised by Aphrodite was Helen, the wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta. Helen was renowned throughout the Greek world for her unparalleled beauty. When Paris traveled to Sparta as a guest, he was welcomed with great hospitality, as was customary in ancient Greek culture. However, while Menelaus was away, Paris and Helen fell in love, or, according to some versions of the myth, Helen was abducted by Paris under Aphrodite's influence. Paris then fled Sparta with Helen, taking with him vast treasures. This act was seen as a grave violation of hospitality and honor, and it ignited the fury of the Greek kings. Menelaus, humiliated and enraged, called upon his brother Agamemnon, the powerful king of Mycenae, to help him reclaim Helen. Agamemnon summoned the former suitors of Helen, many of whom had once sworn an oath to protect her marriage. Bound by this oath, the Greek kings were compelled to join the expedition against Troy. Among them were legendary heroes such as Achilles, the greatest warrior of his age, Odysseus, the cunning king of Ithaca, Ajax the Great, known for his immense strength, and Nestor, the wise elder of Pylos. Together they formed a massive coalition, assembling an army said to consist of over 1,000 ships. The city of Troy, also known as Ilium, was a powerful and wealthy city located near the Dardanelles, a strategic region controlling trade routes between the Aegean Sea and the Black Sea. Troy was ruled by King Priam, a wise but aging monarch, and defended by his sons, most notably Hector, the greatest Trojan warrior. Hector was respected not only for his strength, but also for his sense of duty and honor. Unlike many heroes of Greek myth, Hector fought not for glory, but to protect his family and his homeland. As the Greek fleet set sail for Troy, the journey itself was fraught with challenges. According to legend, the Greeks initially angered the goddess Artemis, who stilled the winds and prevented their departure.
To appease her, Agamemnon was forced to sacrifice his daughter, Iphigenia, a tragic act that cast a dark shadow over the entire expedition. This sacrifice revealed one of the central themes of the Trojan War, the terrible cost of ambition and pride, even before the first battle was fought. When the Greek army finally arrived at Troy, they found the city well fortified, with massive walls said to have been built by the gods themselves. A direct assault on Troy proved impossible, and thus began a long and brutal siege that would last 10 years. During this time, countless battles were fought on the plains outside the city walls. Heroes on both sides sought glory, while ordinary soldiers endured endless hardship, disease, and death. The war became not only a clash of armies, but a testing ground for human endurance and the limits of heroism. The gods themselves took sides in the conflict, turning the Trojan War into a cosmic struggle as much as a human one. Hera and Athena supported the Greeks, still bitter over Paris's judgment, while Aphrodite protected Paris and the Trojans. Zeus attempted to remain neutral, but often intervened to maintain the balance of fate. Apollo, the god of prophecy and plague, favored Troy and would later play a crucial role in the suffering of the Greek army. These divine interventions blurred the line between destiny and free will, raising profound questions about whether mortals truly controlled their own actions. As the years passed, the war settled into a grim routine of raids, skirmishes, and temporary truces. Both sides suffered heavy losses, and neither could claim a decisive victory. The Greeks captured nearby cities allied with Troy, while the Trojans relied on their strong defenses and the bravery of their warriors. Amid this prolonged conflict, personal rivalries and emotions began to shape the course of the war as much as strategy or strength. One of the central figures of the Trojan War was Achilles, the son of Peleus and the sea goddess Thetis. Achilles was said to be nearly invincible, with only one vulnerable spot on his body. His unmatched skill in battle made him the greatest asset of the Greek army, yet his pride and temper often caused conflict among his own allies. Achilles fought for personal glory and eternal fame, knowing that his destiny offered him a choice between a long, obscure life or a short life filled with everlasting renown. The tension between Achilles and Agamemnon would later become a defining moment in the war, but even in its early years, cracks were forming within the Greek leadership. Agamemnon's authority was frequently challenged, and the unity of the Greek coalition was fragile. This internal conflict mirrored the struggles within Troy, where King Priam's decision to shelter Paris and Helen placed the entire city at risk. The Trojan War was not simply a battle between two nations. It was a tragedy born from human flaws, pride, desire, jealousy, and the hunger for honor. By the time the events of the Iliad begin,
As the Trojan War entered its later years, the conflict grew darker, more personal, and far more tragic. What had begun as a quest to reclaim Helen and restore honor slowly transformed into a relentless struggle driven by pride, rage, and destiny. The long siege wore down both armies, and the battlefield outside Troy became a place where heroes rose to glory and fell into legend. It was during this phase of the war that the most famous events unfolded, shaping the story that would echo through history for centuries. At the heart of the Greek camp stood Achilles, the greatest warrior of his age. His presence alone struck fear into the Trojans, for no man could match his speed, strength, and skill in combat. Yet Achilles was not merely a weapon of war. He was a man deeply aware of his fate. He knew that Troy would fall only if he fought, but that his own death would soon follow. This knowledge haunted him, fueling both his desire for glory and his inner conflict. His relationship with Agamemnon, the leader of the Greek forces, was strained from the beginning, as both men were driven by pride and authority. The breaking point came during a dispute over honor and spoils of war.
Agamemnon was forced to give up a captive woman, Chryseis, to appease the god Apollo, who had sent a deadly plague upon the Greek army. To compensate for his loss, Agamemnon seized Briseis, a woman taken by Achilles as a prize of war. This act deeply insulted Achilles, who saw it as a public humiliation and a denial of his honor. Enraged, Achilles withdrew from battle, refusing to fight for the Greeks any longer. His absence would prove catastrophic. Without Achilles, the Greek army struggled to hold its ground. The Trojans, led by Prince Hector, surged forward with renewed confidence. Hector was the embodiment of Trojan valor, brave, loyal, and deeply devoted to his family and city. Unlike Achilles, Hector fought not for personal glory, but out of duty. His farewell to his wife Andromache and his infant son became one of the most poignant moments of the war, symbolizing the human cost of endless conflict. Hector knew he might never return, yet he chose to face his fate without hesitation. As the Trojans pressed their advantage, the Greek defenses began to collapse. Hector led fierce assaults that pushed the Greeks back to their ships, threatening to burn the fleet and end the war entirely. Panic spread through the Greek camp, and Agamemnon realized too late how much they depended on Achilles. Desperate, he sent envoys to Achilles, offering riches, honor, and the return of Briseis. Yet Achilles, consumed by anger, refused all offers. His pride outweighed his loyalty, and the Greeks continued to suffer for it. The tide of war shifted briefly when Patroclus, Achilles' closest companion, entered the battlefield wearing Achilles' armor. Hoping to inspire the Greeks and frighten the Trojans, Patroclus led a counterattack that drove the Trojans back from the ships. For a moment, it seemed as though Achilles himself had returned. However, Patroclus pushed too far, ignoring Achilles' warning not to pursue the enemy to Troy's walls. There, he encountered Hector. In a tragic confrontation shaped by fate and divine will, Hector killed Patroclus. The death of Patroclus marked a turning point in the Trojan War. When news reached Achilles, his grief was overwhelming. His rage now surpassed even his earlier anger toward Agamemnon. Achilles no longer cared about honor, wealth, or pride. He sought only revenge. He reconciled with Agamemnon and prepared to return to battle, knowing full well that his own death was now inevitable. Achilles' return transformed the battlefield into a scene of terror. Armed with new armor forged by the god Hephaestus, Achilles cut through Trojan warriors like a force of nature. Rivers ran red with blood, and even the gods trembled at his fury. The Trojans fled before him, retreating behind the safety of their walls. Only Hector remained outside the city, determined to face Achilles and defend Troy to the end. The duel between Achilles and Hector stands as one of the most iconic moments in ancient literature. Hector, realizing that the gods had abandoned him, attempted to flee, circling the walls of Troy 3 times before finally standing his ground. When the two heroes clashed, the outcome was swift and brutal. Achilles struck down Hector, avenging Patroclus. In a final act of cruelty, Achilles dragged Hector's body behind his chariot, denying him proper burial and deepening the tragedy of the war. Hector's death devastated Troy. King Priam and Queen Hecuba mourned the loss of their greatest defender, while Andromache was left widowed, her future and her son's fate cast into darkness. The Trojans knew that without Hector, their city's doom was near. Yet the war did not end with his death. Achilles' rage continued, but even he could not escape the pull of compassion forever. In one of the most powerful scenes of the Trojan War, King Priam secretly entered the Greek camp to beg Achilles for Hector's body. Kneeling before the man who had killed his son, Priam appealed not as a king, but as a father. Moved by Priam's grief and reminded of his own father, Achilles finally relented. He returned Hector's body, allowing the Trojans to perform proper funeral rites. This moment of shared humanity stood in contrast to the brutality of the war, offering a brief glimpse of peace amid endless suffering. Despite these events, the fall of Troy was still to come. Achilles himself would not live to see it. According to legend, Paris, guided by Apollo, struck Achilles with an arrow to his only vulnerable spot, his heel. The death of Achilles shocked the Greek army, robbing them of their greatest champion. Yet the war continued, driven by momentum and the belief that Troy's destruction was inevitable. After Achilles' death, new heroes rose to prominence. Odysseus, known for his intelligence rather than brute strength, became increasingly influential. Ajax the Great, another mighty warrior, competed for Achilles' armor, but lost it to Odysseus through a contest of wit. Humiliated and driven mad by grief and shame, Ajax took his own life, adding another layer of tragedy to the Greek side of the war. As years of fighting failed to break Troy's defenses, the Greeks turned to cunning instead of force. Odysseus devised a plan that would become one of the most famous deceptions in history. The Greeks constructed a massive wooden horse, hiding elite warriors inside it, while pretending to abandon the war. They left the horse outside Troy's gates as a supposed offering to the gods and sailed away, concealing their fleet nearby. The Trojans, weary of war and eager for victory, debated the fate of the horse. Some, like the priest Laocoon, warned that it was a trap, famously declaring that one should fear Greeks even when they bear gifts. Yet fate and deception prevailed. Believing the horse to be a symbol of triumph, the Trojans brought it inside the city walls. That night, while Troy slept, the Greek warriors emerged from the horse, opened the gates, and allowed the returning army to enter the city. The fall of Troy was swift and merciless. The Greeks slaughtered the inhabitants, burned the city, and destroyed a civilization that had stood for generations. King Priam was killed at his own altar, Andromache and Hecuba were taken into captivity, and Troy was reduced to ashes. Helen was reunited with Menelaus, and the long war finally came to an end. The Trojan War ended not with glory, but with ruin. Both victors and defeated were forever changed by its horrors. The Greeks would face their own trials on their journey home, while the survivors of Troy were scattered across the world. The war became a symbol of the futility of violence and the devastating cost of pride and ambition. Thus, the Trojan War concluded as it began, with the influence of gods, the choices of men, and the unstoppable force of fate. Its legacy lived on through epic poetry, art, and history, reminding future generations that even the greatest heroes are powerless before destiny.
The fall of Troy marked the end of a decade-long war, but it did not bring peace to those who survived it. Instead, the destruction of the great city opened a new chapter filled with suffering, wandering, and divine punishment. For both the victors and the defeated, the aftermath of the Trojan War proved as tragic as the conflict itself. The flames that consumed Troy did not simply erase a city, they reshaped destinies and scattered the remnants of an entire civilization across the ancient world. As Troy burned, chaos ruled the night. Greek warriors moved through the streets, killing without mercy, driven by years of rage and loss. Sacred temples were violated, and ancient customs were forgotten in the madness of victory. King Priam was slain at the altar, a symbol of how even the gods' sanctuaries could not protect mortals from fate. The Trojan royal family was destroyed, and the survivors were taken as captives, their futures bound to foreign lands and foreign masters. The women of Troy suffered the most devastating consequences of the war's end. Hecuba, once a powerful queen, was reduced to a grieving captive, having lost her husband and most of her children. Andromache, the widow of Hector, was taken by Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles, a cruel irony that bound her fate to the family of her husband's killer. Cassandra, cursed with the gift of prophecy that no one believed, foresaw her own doom but could not escape it.
Polyxena was sacrificed on Achilles' tomb, a final offering to the warrior whose rage had shaped the war's darkest moments. Helen, the woman whose beauty had ignited the conflict, stood once more before Menelaus. According to legend, Menelaus raised his sword to kill her, but her beauty disarmed him, and he chose to spare her life. Whether Helen was a victim of the gods or a willing participant remains one of the greatest mysteries of the Trojan War. Her survival symbolized the ambiguity of guilt and innocence that surrounded the entire conflict. Though the Greeks had achieved victory, their triumph was tainted by sacrilege and arrogance. Many had offended the gods during the sack of Troy, and divine retribution soon followed. Athena, angered by the violation of her temple, withdrew her protection. Poseidon and Zeus unleashed storms upon the Greek fleet as it sailed home. The journey back to Greece, known as the Nostos, became a second ordeal, often more deadly than the war itself. Agamemnon, the leader of the Greek forces, returned to Mycenae believing his suffering was over, yet his fate was sealed long before he reached home. His wife, Clytemnestra, had never forgiven him for sacrificing their daughter Iphigenia at the war's beginning. While Agamemnon was away, she took a lover, Aegisthus, and plotted revenge. Upon Agamemnon's return, he was murdered in his own palace, a grim reminder that victory in war does not guarantee safety and peace. Menelaus and Helen faced years of wandering before finally returning to Sparta. Blown off course by storms, they traveled through Egypt and distant lands, gathering wealth but losing time. Their long journey reflected the lingering consequences of the war, as even the reunion of husband and wife could not erase the suffering caused by their actions. Among all the Greek heroes, none endured a journey as long or as painful as Odysseus, the king of Ithaca. Known for his intelligence and cunning, Odysseus had played a crucial role in Troy's fall through the Trojan Horse. Yet it was this same cleverness that often brought him into conflict with the gods. His voyage home would last 10 years, matching the length of the war itself, and would become legendary in its own right. Odysseus's troubles began when he and his men encountered the Cicones, whom they foolishly attacked, suffering heavy losses. Soon after, they were swept into the land of the Lotus Eaters, where forgetfulness threatened to erase their desire to return home. Odysseus's leadership and determination saved his crew, but greater dangers lay ahead. The encounter with the Cyclops Polyphemus marked a turning point in Odysseus's journey. Trapped in the cave of the one-eyed giant, Odysseus used his wit to escape, blinding Polyphemus in the process. However, his pride led him to reveal his name as he sailed away, provoking the wrath of Poseidon, the Cyclops' father. From that moment on, Poseidon became Odysseus's greatest enemy, ensuring that his journey home would be filled with suffering. Odysseus and his men faced countless trials: the deadly song of the Sirens, the monstrous Scylla and Charybdis, and the temptations of the sorceress Circe, who turned men into beasts. Each challenge tested Odysseus's resolve and leadership, while his crew gradually dwindled due to disobedience and fate. When his men slaughtered the sacred cattle of the sun god Helios, Zeus destroyed their ship, leaving Odysseus alone at sea. Eventually, Odysseus reached the island of Calypso, where he was held captive for years, offered immortality if he would abandon his home. Yet Odysseus chose mortality and family over eternal life, a decision that defined his humanity. With the help of the goddess Athena, he was finally allowed to return to Ithaca, disguised as a beggar. Upon his return, Odysseus found his home overrun by suitors seeking to marry his wife, Penelope, whom they believed to be a widow. Penelope, loyal and clever, had delayed them for years through deception. In a dramatic and violent reckoning, Odysseus revealed himself, reclaimed his throne, and restored order to his household. His journey home, filled with loss and endurance, became a symbol of perseverance and the longing for home. While the Greeks struggled to return, the survivors of Troy faced exile and uncertainty. One of the most famous Trojan survivors was Aeneas, a noble warrior who escaped the burning city, carrying his father and leading his son by the hand. Guided by fate and the gods, Aeneas wandered across the Mediterranean, eventually reaching Italy. His journey, later immortalized in Virgil's Aeneid, would lay the mythic foundation for the rise of Rome, transforming Trojan defeat into a new beginning. The Trojan War thus became more than a single conflict. It became a turning point in mythic history. Cities fell, but new civilizations rose from their ashes. Heroes died, but their stories lived on, shaping ideas of honor, courage, and tragedy for generations. The war revealed the fragile nature of human glory and the overwhelming power of fate. In the end, the Trojan War left no true victors. Troy was destroyed, its people scattered or enslaved. The Greeks returned home broken, haunted by loss, and punished by the gods. The cost of pride, desire, and ambition was paid in blood, tears, and generations of suffering. The legacy of the Trojan War endured through epic poetry, art, and philosophy. It served as a warning against the arrogance of power and the illusion of everlasting glory. Even the greatest heroes could not escape destiny, and even divine favor could not prevent tragedy. The story of Troy became a mirror reflecting the best and worst of humanity. Thus, the saga of the Trojan War came to an end, not with peace, but with remembrance. Its echoes traveled through time, reminding the world that war leaves scars far deeper than the ruins of cities, and that the true aftermath of conflict is carried in the hearts of those who survived.
Long after the fires of Troy had burned out and the echoes of battle had faded, the Trojan War continued to shape the ancient world in profound and lasting ways. Though the heroes of the war were gone, their actions lived on through the destinies of their descendants, the rise and fall of kingdoms, and the stories passed down through generations. The Trojan War was not merely an end, but a beginning, a dividing line between an age of heroes and a world struggling to understand the cost of their legacy. In Greece, the return of the warriors did not restore harmony. Instead, the land was plagued by instability, betrayal, and cycles of revenge. Many kings who had fought at Troy found their authority weakened or destroyed. Families were torn apart by old grudges and new crimes as the violence of war followed the soldiers home. The heroic age, once idealized, revealed its darker truth, that glory earned through blood often breeds further suffering. The house of Atreus, already cursed before the war, descended deeper into tragedy after Troy's fall. Following the murder of Agamemnon by Clytemnestra, their son Orestes was driven into exile. Haunted by duty and divine command, Orestes eventually returned to avenge his father by killing his own mother. This act, though demanded by Apollo, condemned him to madness and persecution by the Furies, ancient spirits of vengeance. Only after a divine trial in Athens was Orestes finally absolved, symbolizing a shift from endless blood revenge to the rule of law. This transformation reflected a broader cultural change inspired by the lessons of the Trojan War. In Sparta, Menelaus and Helen ruled together once more, but their kingdom was forever marked by memory. Helen remained a figure of fascination and controversy. Was she a victim of the gods or the cause of untold suffering? Ancient poets never fully agreed. To some, she was a symbol of destructive beauty. To others, a pawn of divine forces beyond mortal control. Her story became a reminder that blame in war is rarely simple or singular. The shadow of Troy also loomed large over Ithaca. Though Odysseus reclaimed his throne, peace did not come easily. Families of the slain suitors demanded justice, threatening civil war. Only the intervention of Athena prevented further bloodshed. Odysseus's story emphasized endurance and intelligence over brute force,
offering a new model of heroism for a world weary of endless conflict. While Greece struggled with the war's aftermath, the Trojan survivors carried their legacy across seas and continents. Among them, Aeneas stood as the embodiment of duty and resilience. Unlike Achilles or Hector, Aeneas was not defined by rage or glory, but by responsibility to his family, his people, and the future. His journey transformed Trojan defeat into hope, suggesting that even in total loss, renewal was possible. Aeneas's travels took him through Carthage, where he encountered Queen Dido, a powerful ruler who fell deeply in love with him. Their relationship briefly offered the promise of peace and happiness, but fate demanded sacrifice. When Aeneas left to fulfill his destiny in Italy, Dido took her own life, cursing his descendants. This tragedy echoed the Trojan War's central theme. Personal happiness must often be surrendered to the demands of fate and history. Upon reaching Italy, Aeneas became entangled in new wars, proving that the legacy of Troy could not escape violence entirely. Yet from these struggles arose the foundations of Roman identity. Through Aeneas's lineage, Rome claimed descent from Troy, transforming a story of defeat into one of imperial destiny. In this way, the Trojan War bridged Greek myth and Roman history, uniting two civilizations through shared legend. Beyond individual stories, the Trojan War reshaped how ancient societies understood war itself. Earlier myths often glorified combat as a path to honor and immortality. The Trojan War, however, revealed war's devastating cost: cities destroyed, families shattered, and generations scarred. Poets like Homer did not hide this suffering. Instead, they placed it at the center of their narratives, forcing audiences to confront the human price of heroism. The gods, too, emerged from the Trojan War in a more ambiguous light. Though powerful, they were shown to be petty, jealous, and deeply flawed. Their constant interference raised unsettling questions about justice and morality. If the gods themselves were driven by pride and revenge, what hope did mortals have? This tension between divine will and human suffering became a central concern of later Greek philosophy and tragedy. Historically, scholars have long debated whether the Trojan War truly occurred. Archaeological discoveries at the site of Hisarlik, believed to be ancient Troy, reveal layers of destruction dating to the late Bronze Age. These findings suggest that a real conflict may have inspired the legend, though its details were transformed by centuries of storytelling. The blending of myth and history reflects humanity's need to find meaning in catastrophe, turning trauma into narrative. The Trojan War also marked the symbolic end of the Bronze Age world. Shortly after the time traditionally associated with the war, many ancient civilizations collapsed, including Mycenaean Greece and the Hittite Empire. Trade networks broke down, cities were abandoned, and writing systems disappeared. While the Trojan War did not cause this collapse, it became a powerful symbol of a world unraveling under the weight of its own violence. In literature, the legacy of the Trojan War proved timeless. Greek tragedians such as Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides returned again and again to its characters, exploring themes of guilt, fate, and moral responsibility. Roman poets, medieval writers, and even modern authors reimagined Troy to reflect their own society's struggles. Each retelling reshaped the war's meaning, ensuring its survival across cultures and centuries. The Trojan War also influenced how later generations defined heroism. Achilles represented unmatched strength and glory, but his rage led to ruin. Hector embodied honor and duty, yet could not save his city. Odysseus showed that intelligence and patience could triumph where force failed. Aeneas demonstrated that true heroism might lie not in victory, but in perseverance and sacrifice. Together, these figures formed a complex portrait of humanity, far removed from simple ideals. Perhaps the greatest lesson of the Trojan War lies in its ending. No side truly won. Troy was destroyed, but Greece paid a heavy price in blood and suffering. The gods achieved their will, yet revealed their cruelty. The war exposed the illusion of everlasting glory, showing that even the greatest achievements fade, while grief endures. As centuries passed, Troy became more than a place. It became a symbol. It represented the fragility of civilization, the danger of pride, and the unstoppable power of fate. Its ruins reminded future generations that wealth and strength offer no protection against human error and divine wrath. The story of Troy warned that wars begun for honor or desire often end in devastation beyond imagination. In the end, the Trojan War survived not because of its battles, but because of its questions. Why do humans go to war? Is fate unchangeable or shaped by choice? Can honor exist without compassion? These questions resonated long after the heroes were gone, ensuring that the Trojan War would never truly end. Thus, the legacy of the Trojan War stretched far beyond the walls of a fallen city. It shaped myths, histories, and identities, becoming a foundation upon which entire cultures built their understanding of the past. From the ashes of Troy rose stories that continue to speak to the human condition, reminding us that the true aftermath of war is not conquest, but memory.
As the centuries passed, the Trojan War evolved from a tale of heroes and battles into a profound reflection on the human condition. What began as an epic of gods and warriors gradually became a mirror through which civilizations examined their values, fears, and ambitions. The war's enduring power lies not in the clash of armies, but in the questions it raises. Questions about fate, choice, honor, suffering, and the true cost of conflict. In this final reflection, the Trojan War emerges not merely as a story of the past, but as a timeless lesson for humanity. At its core, the Trojan War challenges the idea of glory. Ancient societies often celebrated warfare as the highest expression of honor and masculinity. Heroes sought eternal fame, believing that death on the battlefield would grant immortality through memory. Yet the Trojan War exposes the fragility of this belief. Achilles achieves unmatched glory, but at the cost of his life and peace of mind. Hector dies honorably, yet his city is destroyed and his family enslaved. Their sacrifices do not prevent suffering. Instead, they deepen it. Through these figures, the war questions whether glory is worth the price paid by both the living and the dead. Fate plays a central role in shaping the Trojan War, presenting a world where outcomes seem predetermined. Prophecies foretell Troy's fall, Achilles' death, and the suffering of countless others. Yet within this framework of destiny, human choices still matter. Paris chooses Aphrodite's promise over wisdom and power. Agamemnon chooses pride over compassion. Achilles chooses rage over unity. These decisions accelerate the path toward disaster. The war suggests that while fate may set boundaries, human actions determine how tragedy unfolds. This tension between destiny and free will remains one of the most enduring philosophical debates inspired by the Trojan War. The gods, often seen as symbols of justice and order, are portrayed as deeply flawed beings. They manipulate events, favor mortals based on personal grudges, and escalate violence for their own amusement. Rather than offering moral guidance, they reflect humanity's worst impulses: jealousy, pride, and vengeance. This portrayal forces audiences to confront an unsettling truth. Power does not guarantee wisdom or fairness. In later Greek thought,
This realization contributed to a growing skepticism toward divine authority and encouraged philosophical inquiry into ethics independent of the gods. One of the most powerful lessons of the Trojan War lies in its portrayal of suffering. Unlike stories that glorify victory, the Trojan War lingers on grief, loss, and despair. The laments of Hecuba, Andromache, and Cassandra give voice to those often silenced in tales of conquest. Their suffering reveals the hidden victims of war, women, children, and civilians whose lives are shattered by decisions made far from the battlefield. By centering their pain, the Trojan War becomes one of the earliest narratives to acknowledge war's moral complexity and human cost. The war also explores the destructive nature of pride. Nearly every major tragedy in the Trojan War can be traced to wounded ego or unchecked arrogance. Paris's vanity sparks the conflict. Agamemnon's arrogance divides the Greek army. Achilles' pride prolongs the war and leads to countless deaths. Even the Trojans' pride blinds them to the danger of the wooden horse. Through these examples, the Trojan War warns that pride, when left unchallenged, can destroy individuals and entire civilizations. At the same time, the Trojan War does not deny the value of courage and loyalty. Hector's devotion to Troy, Penelope's faithfulness to Odysseus, and Aeneas's sense of duty toward his people represent ideals that transcend violence. These characters suggest that heroism need not be rooted in conquest alone. Instead, it may be found in endurance, responsibility, and moral strength. This broader definition of heroism allowed later generations to reinterpret the Trojan War in ways that aligned with evolving ethical values. The Trojan War's influence on philosophy is profound. Greek thinkers such as Plato and Aristotle engaged deeply with Homer's epics, using them as tools to discuss virtue, justice, and education. Plato criticized the portrayal of the gods as immoral, fearing their impact on society, while Aristotle admired the epics for their exploration of character and consequence. Through these debates, the Trojan War helped shape Western philosophical thought, serving as both inspiration and caution. In Roman culture, the Trojan War took on new meaning. Through Aeneas, Rome claimed a noble and tragic origin, transforming Trojan defeat into imperial destiny. This reinterpretation demonstrates how societies reshape myths to legitimize power and identity. Yet even in Roman retellings, the shadow of loss remains. Aeneas's journey is marked by sacrifice and sorrow, reinforcing the idea that greatness is built upon suffering. The Trojan War thus became a foundational myth not only for Greece, but for the broader Mediterranean world. In the modern era, the Trojan War continues to resonate because its themes remain painfully relevant. Wars are still fought over pride, desire, and power, often justified by honor or ideology. Civilians continue to bear the greatest burden, and victory rarely brings true peace. The Trojan War reminds modern audiences that technological progress does not erase human flaws. The same emotions that drove ancient heroes, fear, ambition, love, and rage, still shape global conflicts today. Literature and art have repeatedly returned to Troy to explore contemporary concerns. From medieval romances to modern novels, from operas to films, each retelling reflects the anxieties of its time. Some versions emphasize romance, others brutality, still others political manipulation. This adaptability ensures the Trojan War's survival, allowing each generation to find its own meaning within the ancient story. Psychologically, the Trojan War offers insight into trauma and memory. Characters are haunted by loss, driven by grief, and unable to escape the past. Achilles' rage, Hecuba's despair, and Odysseus's restlessness resemble modern understandings of psychological wounds caused by war. In this sense, the Trojan War can be seen as one of humanity's earliest explorations of trauma, long before the concept itself was named. Perhaps the most enduring lesson of the Trojan War is its rejection of simple morality. There are no pure heroes or villains. Greeks and Trojans alike commit acts of bravery and cruelty. The war resists easy judgment, forcing audiences to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. This moral ambiguity gives the Trojan War its lasting power, ensuring it remains relevant in a world where conflicts are rarely clear-cut. The Trojan Horse, one of the war's most famous symbols, carries a lesson that extends far beyond the battlefield. It represents deception disguised as victory, a warning that danger enters through trust and complacency. In political, social, and personal contexts, the image of the Trojan horse continues to serve as a metaphor for hidden threats and unintended consequences. As a complete saga, the Trojan War forms a cycle, beginning with desire, escalating through pride and violence, and ending in loss and reflection. Its conclusion offers no triumph, only memory. Cities fall, heroes die, and survivors carry the burden forward. This structure mirrors the reality of human history, where progress is often built upon ruins and remembrance. In the end, the Trojan War endures because it speaks honestly about humanity. It does not promise redemption through victory or justice through strength. Instead, it reveals a world where choices matter, suffering is unavoidable, and meaning must be found amid loss. Its heroes are remembered because they were not perfect, but because they were human. Thus, the Trojan War stands as more than an ancient legend. It is a timeless meditation on war, power, and the human soul. From the judgment of Paris to the ashes of Troy, from wandering heroes to fallen cities, its story continues to echo across time. As long as humanity struggles with conflict and memory, the Trojan War will remain alive, not as a tale of the past, but as a warning and a reflection for the future.
Long after the last echoes of battle faded from the plains of Troy, the war continued to live on in the imagination of humanity. Its story traveled far beyond the Aegean world, shaping cultures, beliefs, and artistic traditions across centuries. The Trojan War became more than a historical or mythological event. It transformed into a shared cultural memory, retold and reshaped to reflect the fears, hopes, and values of each new age. In this sense, Troy never truly fell. It was reborn endlessly through storytelling. In ancient Greece, the Trojan War formed the foundation of cultural identity. Homer's epics were not merely poems, but educational texts, memorized and recited by generations. Through the Iliad and the Odyssey, young Greeks learned about courage, loyalty, honor, and the consequences of pride. These stories offered moral guidance while also acknowledging human weakness. The Trojan War thus became a moral classroom where society examined itself through the actions of legendary heroes. Greek tragedy expanded this legacy by focusing on the war's aftermath rather than its battles. Playwrights such as Euripides gave voice to the defeated, especially Trojan women whose suffering had been ignored in heroic epics. In plays like The Trojan Women, war is stripped of glory and exposed as a source of endless grief. These works challenged audiences to reconsider their admiration for conquest and power, presenting war as a moral failure rather than a triumph. As Greek culture spread, so did the story of Troy. When Rome rose to power, it adopted and transformed the Trojan narrative to suit its imperial ambitions. Through Virgil's Aeneid, Rome claimed Trojan ancestry, presenting itself as the heir to both Trojan endurance and Greek heroism. This adaptation allowed Rome to frame its expansion as destiny rather than aggression. Yet even in this imperial version, sorrow and sacrifice remained central,
reminding readers that greatness is born from loss. During the Middle Ages, the Trojan War entered European literature through translations and reinterpretations. Medieval writers often stripped the story of its pagan gods, reshaping it to align with Christian values. Troy became a symbol of human arrogance punished by divine will. Knights replaced heroes, and chivalric ideals blended with ancient legend. In this form, the Trojan War served as both entertainment and moral warning for medieval audiences. The Renaissance revived interest in classical antiquity, restoring the Trojan War to its ancient complexity. Artists and scholars returned to Homer and Virgil, inspired by their exploration of human emotion and fate. Painters depicted scenes of Hector's farewell, Achilles' rage, and the fall of Troy, emphasizing drama and suffering rather than victory. These works reflected Renaissance humanism, which placed human experience at the center of art and thought. In modern literature, the Trojan War has been endlessly reimagined. Novelists, poets, and playwrights have retold the story from new perspectives, often focusing on marginalized voices. Helen is portrayed not as a temptress, but as a woman trapped by circumstance. Achilles is shown as psychologically fragile, haunted by mortality. These reinterpretations reveal a growing desire to understand the emotional and ethical complexity of war, rather than celebrate its heroes. The Trojan War has also left a deep mark on language and symbolism. Phrases such as Trojan Horse, Achilles' heel, and the face that launched 1,000 ships have become part of everyday speech, used to describe vulnerability, deception, and irresistible attraction. These expressions demonstrate how deeply the war has embedded itself into collective consciousness, shaping how people communicate ideas centuries later. Beyond literature and art, the Trojan War influenced historical thinking. Ancient historians such as Herodotus and Thucydides treated the war as a bridge between myth and recorded history. They questioned its details while acknowledging its cultural importance. This approach laid the groundwork for historical inquiry, encouraging skepticism, evidence, and interpretation rather than blind acceptance of tradition. Archaeology added another layer to Troy's legacy. Excavations at Hisarlik revealed multiple layers of settlement, some destroyed by fire and conflict. While archaeology cannot confirm Homer's narrative, it suggests that Troy was a real city that experienced violent destruction. This discovery blurred the line between myth and history, reinforcing the idea that legends often grow from real human experiences. In the modern world, the Trojan War continues to resonate because it reflects universal patterns of conflict. Nations still justify war through honor, security, or destiny, just as the Greeks and Trojans did. Leaders still make decisions driven by pride, and civilians still suffer the consequences. The Trojan War serves as a reminder that technological advancement does not eliminate the emotional roots of violence. The war's psychological depth has also attracted modern scholars and psychologists. Achilles' rage, Odysseus' restlessness, and Hecuba's grief are examined as early portrayals of trauma and loss. These characters struggle with emotions that modern audiences recognize: anger, guilt, longing, and despair. In this way, the Trojan War becomes a timeless study of the human mind under extreme pressure. Cinema and popular media have further extended Troy's influence. Films, television series, and graphic novels reinterpret the war for contemporary audiences, often emphasizing realism and moral ambiguity. While these adaptations vary in accuracy, they demonstrate the story's adaptability and continued relevance. Each retelling reflects modern concerns, whether they involve the cost of leadership, the futility of violence, or the resilience of survivors. Education systems around the world still include the Trojan War as a foundational text. Students encounter it not only as literature, but as a gateway to understanding ancient cultures, mythology, and ethics. Through Troy, Learners explore how stories shape identity and how myths preserve historical memory. The war thus remains a living part of global education. Perhaps the most significant legacy of the Trojan War lies in its ability to humanize history. Rather than presenting the past as a series of dates and victories, it reveals individuals facing impossible choices. Kings doubt themselves, warriors fear death, and families mourn their losses. This human focus ensures that the Trojan War remains emotionally powerful, even thousands of years after its imagined events. The Trojan War also teaches the danger of forgetting history. Troy fell partly because its people ignored warnings and trusted appearances. This lesson resonates in modern societies that repeat past mistakes despite knowing their consequences. The war urges vigilance, humility, and critical thinking, reminding humanity that wisdom often comes too late. Across time, cultures have used the Trojan War to ask fundamental questions. Is war ever justified? Can honor survive violence? Does destiny excuse cruelty? These questions have no simple answers, which is why Troy continues to matter. Its story does not instruct, it challenges. In the end, the Trojan War endures because it captures the paradox of human civilization. It shows humanity at its most creative and destructive, capable of poetry and cruelty, love and hatred. From this contradiction arises art, philosophy, and memory. Troy becomes not just a city, but a symbol of humanity itself. Thus, the Trojan War's journey through time reveals its greatest power, transformation. Each era reshapes the story, yet its core remains unchanged. Pride leads to conflict leads to suffering, and suffering demands reflection. As long as these patterns exist, the Trojan War will continue to speak across generations. The walls of Troy may have fallen, but its story stands unbroken. Through words, images, and ideas, it survives as a warning, a lesson, and a mirror. In remembering Troy, humanity remembers itself.
As time moved further away from the age of heroes, the Trojan War slowly transformed from a living myth into a distant memory, yet it never lost its power. Each generation inherited the story not as a fixed truth, but as a narrative shaped by its own fears, values, and hopes. The war became a lens through which humanity examined itself, revisiting ancient questions in new forms. In this final phase of its long journey, the Trojan War stands less as a tale of gods and warriors and more as a meditation on memory, identity, and the meaning of history itself. Memory played a crucial role in preserving the Trojan War. Long before it was written down, the story lived through oral tradition. Poets and singers carried it from one gathering to another, reshaping details while preserving its emotional core. This process ensured survival, but it also meant transformation. No single version of the Trojan War ever existed. Instead, it became a collective memory, shaped by countless voices. This fluidity allowed the story to remain relevant, adapting to new cultural and moral landscapes. As writing replaced oral tradition, the Trojan War gained permanence, but also interpretation. Homer's epics fixed certain versions of events, yet even these texts invited debate. Scholars questioned Homer's intentions, his portrayal of heroes, and his treatment of the gods. Was Achilles meant to be admired or feared? Was Hector a symbol of doomed virtue or tragic resistance? These questions ensured that the Trojan War remained intellectually alive, not frozen in time. In later centuries, historians attempted to separate myth from fact. Ancient writers searched for timelines, genealogies, and political causes behind the war. Some argued that the conflict reflected real struggles over trade routes and power in the Aegean world.
Others believed it was purely symbolic. This tension between history and myth became one of the Trojan War's defining features. Rather than weakening the story, uncertainty strengthened it, allowing both imagination and scholarship to coexist. The idea of Troy as a lost civilization captured the human fascination with ruins. Ruins represent both achievement and failure, reminding observers that even the greatest cities can fall. Troy's destruction became a metaphor for impermanence. Empires rose and fell, but Troy's story endured, warning future civilizations that strength alone cannot guarantee survival. This lesson resonated deeply in eras of political instability, when societies saw their own reflection in Troy's fate. In modern times, the Trojan War has been re-examined through the lens of ethics. Scholars and writers increasingly focus on the victims rather than the victors. The suffering of civilians, the enslavement of women, and the trauma of survivors are now central themes. This shift reflects a broader change in how humanity understands war, not as a source of glory, but as a humanitarian disaster. Through Troy, modern audiences confront the moral cost of conflict more directly than ancient listeners ever did. The Trojan War also plays a role in shaping national and cultural identities. For Greeks, it represented a shared heroic past. For Romans, it became a foundational myth. In later European history, Troy was claimed as an ancestor by various nations seeking legitimacy and prestige. Each claim reshaped the story, demonstrating how myths can be used to construct identity and authority. Yet beneath these political uses, the core tragedy of Troy remained unchanged. Psychologically, the Trojan War continues to offer insight into human behavior. Characters act under extreme pressure, revealing the limits of reason and the power of emotion. Achilles' rage, Priam's grief, and Andromache's despair resonate with modern understandings of trauma and loss. These emotional truths transcend time, allowing contemporary readers to connect deeply with ancient figures. The Trojan War thus bridges past and present through shared human experience. The role of women in the Trojan War has gained particular attention in recent interpretations. Once sidelined as prizes or symbols, women are now recognized as central to the story's emotional depth. Helen's ambiguity challenges simplistic judgments. Andromache and Hecuba embody resilience amid devastation. Cassandra represents the tragedy of ignored truth. Their voices transformed the Trojan War from a tale of heroes into a broader human tragedy, expanding its moral scope. Education continues to rely on the Trojan War as a gateway to classical thought. Students encounter it not only as literature, but as a foundation for understanding mythology, philosophy, and history. Through Troy, learners explore narrative structure, symbolism, and ethical complexity. The story encourages critical thinking, inviting readers to question authority, motive, and consequence. In this way, the Trojan War remains an active force in shaping intellectual development. Technological advances have also influenced how the Trojan War is experienced. Digital media, interactive storytelling, and global access to texts allow the story to reach wider audiences than ever before. Yet this accessibility also raises questions about interpretation and authenticity. Each adaptation simplifies or alters aspects of the narrative. The challenge lies in preserving depth while embracing innovation. Troy's survival in the digital age demonstrates its adaptability and enduring appeal. The Trojan War's final legacy may lie in its refusal to offer closure. Unlike stories that end with clear resolution, Troy concludes with scattering, wandering, and uncertainty. Survivors carry the war within them, unable to escape its memory. This open-endedness reflects reality more accurately than triumphal endings. War does not end when battles stop. It lingers in memory, shaping lives long afterward. The Trojan War understood this truth long before modern psychology named it. Philosophically, the Trojan War invites reflection on responsibility. Who is to blame for Troy's fall? Paris for his choice? Helen for her beauty? The gods for their manipulation? Or society itself for valuing honor over compassion? The absence of a clear answer forces audiences to confront complexity. Responsibility is shared, and tragedy arises from collective failure rather than individual evil. This insight remains deeply relevant in a world grappling with shared global crises. The symbolism of the Trojan horse continues to evolve. Beyond deception, it represents unintended consequences. Actions taken in desperation or pride often produce outcomes far beyond their original intent. The horse becomes a warning against short-term thinking and blind trust. Its lesson applies not only to warfare, but to politics, technology, and personal relationships. Troy's fall thus becomes a universal cautionary tale. As a complete saga, the Trojan War traces a cycle familiar to all civilizations: rise, conflict, destruction, and remembrance. It begins with desire and ends with reflection. Along the way, it exposes the strengths and weaknesses of humanity. This cyclical structure ensures that the story remains relevant, as each generation finds itself somewhere within that pattern. Ultimately, the Trojan War endures because it refuses to simplify humanity. It shows people capable of love and cruelty, wisdom and folly. It acknowledges beauty alongside horror, courage alongside despair. In doing so, it honors the complexity of human existence. Troy is not remembered because it fell, but because its story continues to speak. In the modern world, where conflicts still shape lives and histories, the Trojan War serves as both mirror and warning. It reminds humanity that progress without reflection leads to repetition. The past cannot be changed, but it can be understood. Through understanding comes the possibility of choice, of breaking cycles rather than repeating them. Thus, the Trojan War reaches its final form not as a story of ancient battles, but as a living narrative. It exists wherever humans struggle with power, memory, and meaning. Its heroes and victims walk beside us in thought and imagination, urging reflection rather than admiration. The walls of Troy have long since crumbled into dust, but its legacy stands firm in the human mind. Through centuries of retell.
In the modern age, the Trojan War stands at the intersection of myth, history, and human imagination. What once existed only in poetry and legend has now become the subject of scientific inquiry, philosophical debate, and cultural reinterpretation. Rather than diminishing its power, this modern scrutiny has deepened the mystery of Troy, transforming it into one of the most enduring questions of ancient history. How much of the Trojan War was real, and why does it still matter? The search for historical Troy began in earnest during the 19th century, when archaeology emerged as a formal discipline. Scholars and explorers, inspired by Homer's descriptions, sought physical evidence of the legendary city. This pursuit reached a turning point with excavations at Hisarlik in modern-day Turkey. Beneath the soil lay multiple layers of ancient settlements, each built upon the ruins of the previous one. These discoveries suggested that Troy was not a single city, but many cities, destroyed and rebuilt over centuries. Among these layers, archaeologists identified levels dating to the late Bronze Age that showed signs of violent destruction,
burned structures, broken walls, and scattered weapons. While none could be definitively labeled as Homer's Troy, the evidence supported the idea that a powerful city once stood there and met a catastrophic end. This possibility bridged the gap between myth and history, suggesting that the Trojan War may have been inspired by a real conflict, later magnified by storytelling. Yet archaeology alone cannot confirm epic poetry. Homer's Troy is filled with gods, prophecies, and heroes of superhuman ability, elements that belong to myth rather than history. Modern scholars therefore approach the Trojan War as a layered narrative, combining historical memory with symbolic meaning. In this view, the war represents not a single event, but a collective memory of many conflicts compressed into one grand story. Economic and political theories have further reshaped understanding of the Trojan War. Rather than a war fought solely over Helen, historians suggest that Troy's strategic location made it a powerful center of trade. Control over the Dardanelles meant influence over commerce between the Aegean and Black Seas. From this perspective, the Trojan War reflects ancient struggles for economic dominance, masked by mythic storytelling. Helen becomes a symbol rather than a cause, representing honor, alliance, and rivalry. This reinterpretation aligns the Trojan War with patterns seen throughout history. Wars are rarely fought for a single reason. They emerge from complex networks of power, resources, and pride. By stripping away the romantic surface, modern analysis reveals the Trojan War as an early example of geopolitical conflict, one that continues to repeat itself in different forms across time. Despite this rationalization, the emotional core of the Trojan War remains untouched. Scientific explanations do not erase the grief of Andromache, the rage of Achilles, or the despair of Hecuba. These emotions transcend historical accuracy, connecting ancient characters to modern readers. In this way, the Trojan War functions on two levels, as a subject of academic investigation and as a timeless human drama. Modern literature has embraced this duality. Contemporary authors often retell the Trojan War with psychological realism, focusing on inner conflict rather than divine intervention. Gods become metaphors for fate, trauma, or social pressure. Heroes are portrayed as flawed individuals, struggling with fear and identity. These reinterpretations do not replace ancient versions, they coexist with them, expanding the story's relevance. The Trojan War has also influenced modern discussions about memory and narrative. Historians recognize that societies remember the past selectively, shaping stories to serve present needs. The Trojan War exemplifies this process. Each era retells Troy differently, emphasizing elements that resonate with contemporary concerns: honor in ancient Greece, destiny in Rome, morality in medieval Europe, and trauma in the modern world. This adaptability explains why the Trojan War continues to appear in education, media, and scholarship. It offers a framework through which humanity can explore conflict without being confined to a single time or place. Troy becomes a universal city, representing all civilizations that rise, struggle, and fall. In the realm of ethics, the Trojan War challenges modern audiences to reconsider responsibility in war. Ancient epics often glorified violence, yet they also exposed its consequences. Today, this tension mirrors debates about warfare, leadership, and accountability. Who bears responsibility for destruction? The leader who commands, the soldier who obeys, or the society that supports conflict? The Trojan War offers no simple answers, making it a powerful tool for ethical reflection. The treatment of civilians in the Trojan War has gained particular relevance in modern times. The suffering of non-combatants, once a background detail, is now central to interpretation. This shift reflects changing moral standards and increased awareness of humanitarian issues. Through Troy, modern readers confront the reality that war's greatest victims are often those with the least power. The Trojan Horse, re-examined through a modern lens, symbolizes more than clever strategy. It represents the dangers of complacency, misinformation, and internal collapse. Troy did not fall because its walls were weak, but because trust was misplaced and warnings ignored. This lesson resonates strongly in an era defined by information warfare, political deception, and technological vulnerability. Technological advances have also transformed how Troy is studied and imagined. Digital reconstructions, satellite imagery, and virtual reality allow scholars and audiences to visualize ancient Troy in unprecedented detail. These tools bring the past closer, yet they also raise questions about authenticity. How much reconstruction becomes interpretation? The Trojan War reminds us that even with advanced technology, the past remains partly unknowable. Globalization has further expanded Troy's reach. Once confined to the Mediterranean world, the Trojan War is now studied and retold across cultures. Its themes resonate beyond Western tradition, finding parallels in epics from Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. This global perspective reveals Troy as part of a shared human heritage, not the possession of any single culture. In this broader context, the Trojan War becomes a story about humanity itself. It captures recurring patterns, desire leading to conflict, conflict leading to destruction, and destruction leading to reflection. These cycles appear in every era, reminding us that history does not move in a straight line, but in echoes. Perhaps the most striking aspect of the Trojan War's modern relevance is its focus on choice. While fate looms large, characters constantly make decisions that shape outcomes. This emphasis aligns with contemporary belief in agency and responsibility. The war suggests that while circumstances may constrain us, our responses define us. This message remains deeply meaningful in a world facing complex global challenges. As a complete saga, the Trojan War resists closure. Even after 8 parts, its story feels unfinished because it continues to evolve. New discoveries, interpretations, and retellings ensure that Troy remains alive in thought and discourse. Its endurance lies not in certainty, but in openness, an invitation to question, reflect, and reinterpret. In the end, the Trojan War's greatest legacy is not the fall of a city, but the survival of a story. Through centuries of change, it has adapted without losing its essence. It reminds humanity that progress must be accompanied by memory, and that power without wisdom leads to ruin. The ruins of Troy stand silent, but their silence speaks volumes. They tell of ambition and error, courage and loss, hope and despair. They remind us that civilization is fragile, and that the stories we tell about our past shape the future we build. Thus, the Trojan War enters its final modern form, not as myth alone, not as history alone, but as a living dialogue between the two. It exists wherever humans seek to understand themselves through the past. As long as questions about war, identity, and meaning endure, Troy will remain. The city may have fallen, but its lesson stands. In remembering Troy, humanity is reminded that the true measure of civilization lies not in...
After the fall of Troy, the world of heroes did not return to peace. Victory did not bring closure, and survival did not guarantee happiness. Instead, the Trojan War revealed its final and perhaps most enduring truth. Wars do not truly end when cities fall. They continue in memory, in trauma,
and in the lives of those who walk away carrying invisible scars. The aftermath of Troy became a second epic, one defined not by glory, but by loss, disillusionment, and wandering. For the Greeks, the return home was often more painful than the war itself. Many heroes faced storms, curses, and inner turmoil. Odysseus wandered for 10 years, not merely because of angry gods, but because the war had changed him. His journey reflects the psychological cost of conflict, the difficulty of returning to normal life after prolonged violence. Home was no longer a place of rest. It had become unfamiliar, distant, and fragile. Agamemnon's fate offered another grim lesson. As the commander of the Greek forces, he returned victorious, only to be murdered by his own wife, Clytemnestra. His death symbolized the collapse of authority and the consequences of moral compromise. The sacrifice of Iphigenia, once justified as necessary for victory, returned as a debt that could not be escaped. The Trojan War thus revealed that power gained through cruelty often leads to destruction from within. Menelaus, whose honor had sparked the war, found Helen again, but their reunion lacked triumph. Ancient sources describe a moment of hesitation, even doubt, as Menelaus confronted the woman for whom so many had died. This moment captures the emptiness of war's justifications. When the cost becomes visible, the original cause loses its meaning. Helen, once a symbol of desire, became a reminder of irreversible loss. For the Trojans, survival meant exile and erasure. Aeneas, carrying his father and leading his people away from burning Troy, embodied the endurance of memory. His journey westward was not a search for conquest, but for continuity. Through Aeneas, Troy did not vanish, it transformed. Roman tradition would later claim him as an ancestor, linking Troy's fall to Rome's rise. In this way, destruction became the seed of a new civilization. This transformation highlights a central theme of the Trojan War. Endings are also beginnings. Civilizations fall, but their stories persist, reshaped by those who inherit them. Troy's legacy did not lie in its walls, but in its influence on future cultures. The war became a foundation myth, explaining origins, values, and identity for generations to come. The psychological dimension of the Trojan War has gained increasing attention in modern interpretations. Ancient texts describe grief, rage, and despair with striking clarity. Achilles' uncontrollable anger, Andromache's terror for her child, and Priam's heartbreak reveal an understanding of trauma far ahead of its time. These portrayals suggest that ancient societies recognized the emotional cost of violence, even if they lacked modern terminology. In this sense, the Trojan War can be read as one of humanity's earliest explorations of post-war trauma. The heroes are not healed by victory, they are haunted by it. Their suffering challenges the idea that war produces clear winners. Instead, it leaves behind fractured individuals struggling to redefine themselves. Women's voices in the aftermath of Troy offer some of the most powerful reflections on war. Figures like Hecuba, Cassandra, and Andromache represent the silent majority affected by conflict. Stripped of status, family, and future, they embody the true cost of war. Their suffering exposes the imbalance of power and the vulnerability of civilians, an issue that remains painfully relevant today. Cassandra's fate is particularly symbolic. Gifted with prophecy, but cursed never to be believed, she foresaw Troy's destruction, yet could not prevent it. After the war, her voice remained ignored, even as she predicted her own death. Cassandra represents the tragedy of ignored truth, a reminder that knowledge without power offers no protection. Her story resonates strongly in a modern world where warnings are often dismissed until it is too late. The Trojan War also reshaped how societies understood heroism. Traditional heroes were defined by strength and honor, but the aftermath revealed a deeper measure of greatness, endurance, compassion, and wisdom. Priam's journey to Achilles' tent, where he begged for his son's body, stands as one of the most human moments in the epic. It suggests that true heroism lies not in victory, but in empathy. This shift in values influenced later philosophical thought. Greek philosophers questioned the glorification of war, using Troy as a cautionary tale. The war became a symbol of excess, of pride unchecked by reason. In this way, the Trojan War contributed not only to literature, but to moral reflection and intellectual growth. Over time, the Trojan War evolved into a universal metaphor. It represented the futility of conflict, the fragility of civilization, and the persistence of memory. Artists, poets, and thinkers across centuries returned to Troy to explore their own anxieties. Each retelling emphasized different aspects, but the core remained unchanged. War destroys more than it creates. In modern times, the Trojan War has been used to examine nationalism and identity. Competing interpretations reflect differing cultural values. Some emphasize Greek ingenuity and heroism. Others highlight Trojan dignity and suffering. This plurality of perspectives underscores the complexity of the war. There is no single truth, only overlapping narratives shaped by memory and ideology. The idea of the Trojan horse has taken on new meaning in the modern world. Beyond its mythic origins, it has become a symbol of deception, infiltration, and unintended consequences. The lesson is clear: threats often disguised as gifts, and downfall frequently arises from within. This metaphor continues to influence political, technological, and cultural discourse. Technological reinterpretations have further expanded Troy's reach. Films, novels, and digital media reimagine the war for new audiences. While accuracy varies, the persistence of the story demonstrates its adaptability. Each generation reshapes Troy according to its fears and hopes, proving that the war is not confined to the past. Education systems continue to use the Trojan War as a gateway to understanding ancient history, literature, and ethics. Through Troy, students encounter questions about fate, choice, leadership, and responsibility. These themes remain relevant, ensuring the war's place in collective learning. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Trojan War is its warning against hubris. Both Greeks and Trojans believed themselves favored by destiny, yet both suffered immense loss. The war teaches us that confidence without humility leads to ruin. This message echoes across centuries, reminding societies to balance ambition with restraint. As a complete narrative, the Trojan War resists simple moral judgment. There are no pure heroes, no absolute villains. Instead, it presents a world shaped by flawed individuals navigating forces beyond their control. This realism gives the story its lasting power, allowing readers to see themselves reflected in ancient characters. In the end, the Trojan War survives because it speaks to fundamental human experiences. Love, anger, fear, hope, and regret are woven into its fabric. These emotions transcend time, connecting modern readers to an ancient past. Troy becomes less a place and more a mirror, reflecting humanity's recurring struggles. The ruins of Troy may lie quiet, but their story continues to speak. Each stone represents a choice made, a life lost, a lesson learned. The war reminds us that civilization is not defined by walls or weapons, but how it remembers and responds to its own history. Thus, the Trojan War does not conclude with silence. It endures as a living narrative, one that challenges, warns, and inspires. As long as humanity seeks to understand the cost of conflict and the meaning of legacy, the story of Troy will remain unfinished. The city fell, the heroes died, but the questions remain. And in those questions, the Trojan War lives on.
As time passed and the echoes of battle faded, the Trojan War transformed from a living memory into a distant legend. The clash of swords, the cries of warriors, and the burning of Troy slowly dissolved into silence. Yet this silence was not empty. It carried within it the weight of countless lives, choices, and consequences. The Trojan War entered its final form, not as an event of violence, but as a story of reflection. In the quiet after destruction, the survivors faced a world forever changed. Cities lay in ruins, families were broken, and identities had been reshaped by loss. The war had not only destroyed Troy, it had altered the moral landscape of the ancient world. People began to question the meaning of honor, the cost of pride, and the true value of victory. In this questioning, the Trojan War found its deepest purpose. Memory became the battlefield of the future. Those who lived after the war inherited its stories, not its swords. Parents told children of heroes and tragedies, shaping their understanding of courage and caution. In this way, the Trojan War continued to influence lives long after the final flames died. It became a lesson passed down through generations, warning against blind ambition and unchecked desire. The heroes of Troy slowly lost their divine glow and became human once more. Achilles was remembered not only for his strength, but for his rage and sorrow. Hector was honored not merely as a warrior, but as a father and husband who chose duty over safety. These reinterpretations softened the sharp edges of myth, allowing empathy to replace admiration alone. The war was no longer about winning, it was about understanding. As centuries passed, poets and scholars revisited the Trojan War in moments of peace and crisis alike. During times of expansion, it was used to glorify conquest. During times of reflection, it became a cautionary tale. This flexibility ensured its survival. The Trojan War adapted to the needs of each era, proving that stories endure when they can change without losing their core truth. The ruins of Troy stood as silent witnesses to this transformation. Stones that once formed mighty walls now lay scattered, exposed to wind and time. Travelers who visited the site no longer searched for heroes, but for meaning. They walked among the ruins not to celebrate destruction, but to contemplate impermanence. Troy became a symbol of the fragile line between greatness and ruin. In philosophical thought, the Trojan War inspired deep reflection on fate and free will. Were the characters bound by destiny, or did their choices shape their downfall? This question remained unanswered, inviting endless debate. Perhaps the truth lay somewhere in between, that fate creates circumstances, but humans decide how to respond. The war thus became a meditation on responsibility. The role of the gods, once central to the story, gradually shifted in interpretation. Rather than literal beings, they came to represent forces beyond human control: nature, chance, emotion, and social pressure. In this light, the Trojan War mirrored the internal struggles of humanity. The gods were no longer external rulers, but reflections of human fear, desire, and hope. One of the most enduring lessons of the Trojan War is the illusion of permanence. Troy believed its walls were unbreakable, its legacy eternal. Yet nothing proved immune to time and error. This realization resonates deeply in every age. Civilizations rise with confidence, only to fall through a combination of internal weakness and external pressure. Troy stands as an early reminder of this universal pattern. The Trojan horse, remembered long after the war, became the ultimate symbol of subtle destruction. It taught that force alone does not decide outcomes. Intelligence, deception, and psychological insight play equally powerful roles. More importantly, it warned that downfall often begins with trust misplaced. This lesson remains relevant in a world shaped by diplomacy,
technology and hidden threats. As the story of Troy spread across cultures, it lost its geographical boundaries. It became a shared human narrative. Different civilizations saw themselves reflected in different characters, some in the proud Trojans, others in the ambitious Greeks. This shared ownership allowed the Trojan War to transcend origin and become universal. In education, the Trojan War evolved into more than a historical tale. It became a framework for exploring ethics, leadership, and consequence. Students learned not only dates and names, but questions. When does loyalty become obsession? When does honor become destruction? These questions ensured that Troy remained alive in thought, not frozen in the past. The emotional depth of the Trojan War also contributed to its endurance. Unlike many ancient stories, it did not shy away from grief. It allowed characters to mourn openly, to question their actions, and to suffer without resolution. This honesty gave the story a timeless quality. Pain, after all, does not change with time. In modern storytelling, the Trojan War has often been retold as a quiet tragedy rather than a loud epic. The focus shifts from battlefields to inner worlds. Silence replaces noise. Reflection replaces triumph. This evolution mirrors humanity's growing awareness of war's true cost. Glory fades, but memory remains. The Trojan War ultimately teaches that history is not just a record of events, but a collection of lessons waiting to be understood. Each retelling adds a new layer of meaning, shaped by the storyteller's perspective. There is no final version of Troy, only ongoing interpretation. As Part 10 brings this long journey to a close, the Trojan War rests not as a finished story, but as an open one. Its power lies in its ability to provoke thought rather than provide answers. It asks humanity to look inward, to recognize patterns, and to choose differently when faced with similar paths. The fall of Troy reminds us that strength without wisdom leads to ruin, and that victory without compassion is hollow. These lessons echo softly but persistently, like waves against ancient shores. They do not demand attention, they invite contemplation. In the end, Troy becomes a mirror held up to humanity. It reflects ambition and fear, love and loss, courage and regret. Through this reflection, humanity gains the opportunity to grow. Whether that opportunity is taken remains an open question. The Trojan War fades into quiet memory, but it never truly ends. It lives in stories told at night, in lessons taught in classrooms, and in moments of reflection after conflict. It survives because it speaks not of gods and heroes alone, but of human nature itself. And so, as the final words settle, Troy stands once more, not as a burning city, but as a timeless reminder. The war is over, yet its meaning continues. In remembering Troy, humanity remembers itself.
Long after the dust of Troy had settled and the last echoes of battle had vanished, the Trojan War continued to live in the collective consciousness of humanity. It no longer existed as a single story told by poets, but as a vast ocean of interpretations, memories, and meanings. Each generation approached Troy not to discover what happened, but to understand what it meant. The Trojan War gradually became a bridge between myth and history. Ancient listeners may have believed every word of Homer as truth, but later thinkers learned to read between the lines. They understood that even if the gods did not walk among men, the emotions, fears, and ambitions described were undeniably real. In this way, Troy became more truthful than factual. It captured the essence of human conflict rather than the details of a single war. As civilizations rose and fell, the Trojan War served as a reference point for understanding decline. Empires saw in Troy a warning written in stone. Power creates confidence. Confidence breeds arrogance, and arrogance invites collapse. This pattern repeated itself across history,
from ancient kingdoms to modern states, Troy became the first great lesson in the fragility of dominance. The Greeks themselves eventually turned inward, questioning the values that had driven them to war. Philosophers like Plato and later thinkers examined Homeric heroes critically. Achilles' rage was no longer admired without question. It was analyzed as a destructive force. Agamemnon's authority was seen not as noble leadership, but as flawed command shaped by ego. Through such reflection, the Trojan War helped shape early ethical philosophy. Roman civilization adopted Troy in a different way. Through the story of Aeneas, Rome claimed Trojan ancestry, transforming defeat into destiny. This reinterpretation demonstrates how history is reshaped to serve identity. Troy's fall became Rome's beginning, proving that meaning is not fixed, but constructed. The Trojan War thus became a tool of cultural continuity. In medieval Europe, the Trojan War was retold through Christian moral frameworks. Pagan gods faded into allegory, while themes of sin, pride, and punishment took center stage. Troy was portrayed as a city undone by moral failure, aligning ancient tragedy with medieval worldview. This adaptation ensured the story's survival even as belief systems changed. The Renaissance revived Troy once more, this time through art and humanism. Painters and writers focused on individual emotion, Helen's beauty, Hector's nobility, Andromache's sorrow. The war became a study of humanity rather than destiny. Artists saw in Troy an opportunity to explore love, loss, and the complexity of choice. With the rise of modern scholarship, the Trojan War entered a new phase. Archaeology challenged blind belief, while literary criticism deepened understanding. Scholars debated timelines, locations, and sources, yet rarely dismissed the story entirely. Instead, they recognized it as a cultural memory, an echo of real events shaped by imagination. Troy became both a place and an idea. Modern psychology has found unexpected relevance in the Trojan War. The emotional struggles of its characters resemble what is now called trauma. Nightmares, uncontrollable anger, grief, and detachment appear throughout the narrative. Achilles' withdrawal from battle, for instance, mirrors emotional shutdown after loss. The war thus reads like an ancient case study of the human mind under extreme stress. This psychological lens transforms how heroism is understood. Heroes are no longer admired solely for strength, but for vulnerability. Hector's fear for his family, Priam's grief for his son, and even Achilles' tears reveal that courage and pain coexist. The Trojan War teaches that humanity is not weakened by emotion, but defined by it. The role of women in the Trojan War has gained increasing attention in modern interpretation. Once sidelined, their voices now stand at the center of analysis. Helen, often blamed for the war, is re-examined as a figure trapped by forces beyond her control. Andromache and Hecuba represent resilience in suffering, while Cassandra symbolizes ignored truth. Through them, the war exposes the imbalance of power and the silencing of vulnerable voices. In this light, the Trojan War becomes a critique of patriarchal conflict. Decisions made by powerful men result in suffering borne largely by women and children. This realization aligns the ancient story with modern discussions about justice, responsibility, and representation. Troy speaks not only of the past, but of ongoing struggles. The Trojan horse, perhaps the most famous symbol of the war, has evolved far beyond its original context. In the modern world, it represents hidden danger, manipulation, and internal collapse. Its lesson is subtle yet powerful. Destruction often enters disguised as opportunity. This metaphor has found relevance in politics, technology, and even personal relationships. As global communication expanded, the Trojan War transcended Western tradition. Scholars began comparing it with epics from other cultures, discovering shared themes of heroic struggle, tragic loss, and moral ambiguity. These parallels suggest that Troy is not unique, but universal. It reflects patterns embedded in human storytelling across civilizations. In education, the Trojan War remains a foundational narrative. It introduces students to history, literature, and philosophy simultaneously. More importantly, it encourages critical thinking. Rather than offering clear answers, it presents dilemmas. Should Achilles have chosen glory or life? Could Troy have been saved through humility? Such questions ensure that the story remains alive. The endurance of the Trojan War lies in its openness. It does not demand belief, it invites interpretation. Each reader finds something different within it: warning, inspiration, sorrow, or reflection. This adaptability allows the story to survive cultural shifts without losing relevance. In the modern era, marked by global conflict and rapid change, the Trojan War feels strangely familiar. Cities still fall, refugees still flee, and leaders still justify violence through honor or necessity. Troy reminds humanity that progress does not erase ancient patterns. It challenges societies to learn rather than repeat. As this long journey through the Trojan War reaches part 11, the story no longer belongs to the past alone. It exists in the present, shaping how conflict is remembered and discussed. It stands as a reminder that history is not finished, it is continuously rewritten by those who engage with it. The Trojan War ultimately teaches that stories outlive stone. Walls crumble, cities burn, but narratives endure. Through them, humanity preserves memory, confronts failure, and seeks meaning. Troy fell once, but it rises endlessly in thought. In the silence where Troy once stood, questions remain. Why do wars begin? Why are warnings ignored? Why does humanity repeat its mistakes? The Trojan War does not answer these questions. Instead, it ensures they are never forgotten. And so, Troy continues, not as a battlefield, but as a conversation across time. As long as humans seek to understand themselves through the past, the Trojan War will remain unfinished, waiting to be read, reinterpreted, and remembered.
As centuries drifted further away from the fall of Troy, the war slowly transformed into something quieter and deeper than a tale of heroes and battles. It became a space for reflection, a long echo carried through time. The clamor of shields and swords faded, replaced by questions whispered across generations. What remained was not the war itself, but the meaning humanity continued to search for within it. The Trojan War endured because it spoke to an inner truth about human nature. It revealed how desire can overpower reason, how pride can blind wisdom, and how fear can silence compassion. These truths did not belong solely to the ancient world. They followed humanity into every age, resurfacing whenever conflict arose. Troy became less a memory of a city and more a symbol of choices made under pressure. As history moved forward, storytellers began to slow the pace of the narrative. Instead of focusing on the speed of battle, they lingered on moments of stillness. A mother watching her child sleep inside doomed walls. A warrior standing alone at dawn, aware that survival might cost his soul. These quiet moments gave the Trojan War its lasting emotional power. Silence, not violence, became the heart of the story. In this silence, the idea of fate took on new meaning. Ancient audiences often accepted destiny as unavoidable, yet later interpretations questioned this belief. Was Troy destined to fall, or did it fall because warnings were ignored and pride prevailed? This question remains unresolved, allowing each generation to answer differently. The war thus became a meditation on responsibility rather than inevitability. The gods, once commanding every turn of the story, gradually receded into the background. Modern readers saw them not as divine beings, but as reflections of human emotion, anger, jealousy, love, and fear. When gods argued, humans suffered. This realization shifted blame inward. The Trojan War was no longer something imposed by heaven, but something created by human hands and hearts. As the divine faded, humanity stepped forward. The focus turned to ordinary lives caught between great powers, farmers who abandoned fields, children who grew up knowing only fear, elders who watched traditions collapse. These unseen figures gave the war its true scale. Troy fell not only through heroic duels, but through the quiet exhaustion of an entire society. The Trojan War also became a story about listening or failing to listen. Cassandra's warnings echoed through time as a symbol of ignored truth. Her tragedy lay not in knowing the future, but in being powerless to change it. In every era, Cassandra reappears in new forms, voices dismissed, truths delayed, lessons learned too late. Through her, Troy warns against arrogance toward knowledge. As the centuries passed, Troy entered the realm of collective memory rather than recorded history. It lived in art, poetry, and education. Each retelling softened some edges and sharpened others. Some emphasized heroism, others sorrow. Yet none could erase the sense of loss that lingered at the story's core. Troy's fall remained irreversible, reminding humanity that not all mistakes can be undone. The Trojan War also reshaped how people understood victory. The Greeks won the war, yet their triumph was hollow. Many heroes died, others returned broken, and peace proved fragile. This contradiction challenged the idea that success is measured by conquest. The war suggested instead that true victory lies in preservation of life, of wisdom, of restraint. As modern societies emerged, the Trojan War found new relevance in times of global conflict. Leaders and thinkers returned to Troy seeking perspective. They saw in it a mirror of their own struggles. Alliances formed through fear, wars justified through honor, destruction hidden behind noble words. Troy reminded them that language can disguise violence and that narratives can excuse cruelty. Education transformed the Trojan War into a tool for critical thinking. Students were encouraged not merely to remember names and events, but to question motives and consequences. Why did Achilles choose glory over life? Why did Troy trust the horse despite clear danger? These questions trained minds to look beyond surface explanations, keeping the story alive through inquiry. In literature, the Trojan War evolved into a calm, almost meditative narrative. Writers focused on memory rather than action, on aftermath rather than climax. The war became a long reflection on impermanence. Cities rise, walls stand, and people believe themselves secure until time proves otherwise. Troy became a reminder that nothing built by humans is immune to change. The ruins of Troy themselves took on symbolic meaning. Weathered stones under open sky spoke of endurance and decay at once. Visitors walked among them not with excitement, but with quiet respect. The absence of sound felt appropriate. Troy no longer needed voices. Its silence was enough. Through this silence, the Trojan War began to teach acceptance, not acceptance of violence, but acceptance of truth, that suffering leaves marks, that history cannot be rewritten, only understood, that memory, though painful, is necessary for growth. Troy taught humanity to remember without glorifying, to reflect without repeating. The war also became a story about time itself. 10 years of conflict, followed by endless remembrance. This imbalance revealed something profound. Moments of destruction are brief, but their consequences last generations.
The Trojan War thus warned that decisions made in haste can echo far beyond their moment. As Part 12 unfolds, the Trojan War feels less like an epic and more like a quiet companion to human history. It walks beside civilization, observing, reminding, questioning. It does not shout its lessons. It waits patiently for those willing to listen. In this calm retelling, Troy becomes a place of learning rather than loss alone. Its fall becomes a teacher, guiding humanity toward humility. The war suggests that strength must be balanced with wisdom and courage with compassion. Without this balance, even the greatest cities fall. The Trojan War ultimately invites humanity to slow down, to pause before choosing conflict, to listen before acting, to remember before repeating. These gentle lessons, carried softly through time, give the story its enduring power. As this part draws toward its end, Troy stands no longer as a burning city, but as a quiet horizon. It marks where humanity has been and hints at where it might go. Whether the lessons are learned remains uncertain, but the story remains ready. The Trojan War rests now in stillness, yet within that stillness lies movement, thought, memory, and understanding. As long as humans reflect on their past, Troy will remain present, not as a warning shouted, but as a truth softly spoken. And in that quiet truth, the Trojan War continues.
With the passage of immense time, the Trojan War ceased to feel like a story that belonged to any single era. It drifted beyond chronology and became something almost timeless, like a distant horizon that never fully disappears. The war no longer demanded attention through noise or spectacle. Instead, it remained present through quiet reflection, reminding humanity of what it had been, what it was, and what it might become. As memory softened the sharp edges of violence, Troy emerged as a symbol rather than a city. Its name no longer evoked flames and screams alone, but contemplation. People spoke of Troy when they wished to discuss loss without anger, failure without blame, and history without triumph. The war became a shared language for expressing regret and wisdom. In this later understanding, the Trojan War revealed itself as a story about time's patience. 10 years of conflict passed quickly compared to the centuries of remembrance that followed. This imbalance suggested a profound truth. Destruction is brief, but meaning unfolds slowly. Humanity often acts in moments, yet lives with consequences for generations. Troy became the first great reminder of this reality. The characters of the Trojan War also changed as they passed through time. Achilles was no longer only the fastest and strongest warrior. He became a symbol of inner conflict, torn between a short, glorious life and a long, quiet one. His choice echoed across centuries as a question every generation faced in different forms, whether to pursue recognition or peace. Hector's image softened even further. He came to represent responsibility and restraint, a man who fought not for conquest, but for protection. His farewell to Andromache became one of the most remembered moments of the entire war because it captured the human cost of duty. In Hector, the Trojan War found its moral center. Helen, once blamed as the cause of everything, gradually transformed into a figure of complexity and ambiguity. Later interpretations saw her not as a villain, but as a woman shaped by forces beyond her control, political alliances, divine interference, and male ambition. Through Helen, the war questioned the simplicity of blame and exposed the danger of reducing complex events to single causes. The Trojan War also became a meditation on silence. What was not said often carried more weight than what was spoken. The unrecorded lives, the unnamed dead, and the forgotten survivors formed the invisible foundation of the story.
Modern readers began to sense that the true tragedy of Troy lay not only in famous deaths, but in countless ordinary lives erased without record. As the gods faded further into metaphor, the war turned inward. Divine conflict became psychological struggle. Athena's wisdom, Ares' rage, and Aphrodite's desire were no longer external forces, but inner impulses within the human mind. The Trojan War thus became a map of human emotion, charting how unchecked impulses could lead entire civilizations toward ruin. In this interpretation, Troy did not fall because of fate alone, but because balance was lost. Reason failed to restrain pride, patience failed to restrain anger, and compassion failed to restrain ambition. The war became a lesson in imbalance, one that echoed through philosophy, ethics, and governance. As societies matured, the Trojan War found a place in moments of collective pause. After great conflicts, people returned to Troy seeking understanding rather than inspiration. They found in it a reminder that suffering is not unique, that humanity has faced devastation before and survived. Troy offered comfort not through hope alone, but through shared memory. The ruins of Troy themselves became part of this quiet teaching. Exposed to sun and wind, they resisted drama. There were no grand monuments proclaiming victory, only stones bearing witness to time. Visitors often described a sense of calm rather than excitement, as if the land itself encouraged reflection. Troy no longer demanded to be remembered loudly. The Trojan War also reshaped the idea of legacy. Heroes sought immortality through fame, yet it was the story, not the individuals, that endured. This realization challenged the pursuit of personal glory. It suggested that meaning lies not in being remembered by name, but in contributing to a story that helps others understand themselves. In literature, the war increasingly appeared in fragmented forms: poems, reflections, reimagined monologues. This fragmentation mirrored memory itself. The Trojan War was no longer a single narrative, but a collection of moments, emotions, and questions. Each fragment invited interpretation, allowing readers to assemble their own understanding. The theme of return continued to haunt the story. Those who survived Troy rarely found peace upon returning home. This struggle reflected a universal truth. Experiences of deep loss permanently alter perception. Home may remain unchanged, but the person returning is not. Through this theme, the Trojan War spoke quietly to anyone who had endured hardship. In modern times, Troy became a symbol used sparingly but powerfully. It appeared in discussions about war fatigue, moral exhaustion, and the limits of ambition. Leaders invoked Troy not to inspire conquest, but to warn against overreach. The story had matured alongside humanity. The Trojan Horse, once a moment of clever deception, took on a deeper meaning in this calm retelling. It became a symbol of self-deception, the danger of believing what we want to believe. Troy fell not because the horse was clever, but because doubt was silenced. This lesson resonated strongly in an age shaped by misinformation and denial. As the Trojan War continued to age, it grew gentler. Its anger cooled, its grief softened, and its lessons deepened. It no longer accused, it observed. It no longer shouted warnings, it offered perspective. This transformation ensured its survival, for stories that age with humanity remain relevant. In education and reflection, Troy became a place to practice empathy. Students were encouraged to imagine themselves not as heroes, but as ordinary people living within the walls. This shift changed the moral focus of the story. War was no longer an abstract event, but a lived experience with lasting consequences. The Trojan War ultimately became a story about listening to history, to memory, and to one another. It suggested that wisdom lies not in repeating the past, but in understanding it deeply enough to choose differently. Troy did not demand perfection, It invited awareness. As Part 13 draws to a close, the Trojan War feels almost like a quiet companion rather than a dramatic epic. It walks beside humanity, offering reminders when ambition grows too loud and patience grows too thin. Its presence is subtle but persistent. The city of Troy no longer burns in imagination. It rests, and in its rest, it teaches that civilizations are fragile, that choices matter, that memory is both a burden and a gift. The Trojan War remains unfinished, not because it lacks an ending, but because its meaning continues to unfold. Each generation adds a new layer of understanding, shaped by its own struggles and hopes. In this way, Troy never truly falls again. It lives on, not as stone or flame, but as quiet knowledge carried forward through time. And as long as humanity pauses to reflect, the story of the Trojan War will remain, calm, enduring, and deeply human.
When the Trojan War is viewed from the farthest distance of time, it no longer appears as a single tragedy or a single lesson. It becomes a long shadow cast across human civilization, stretching from the ancient world into the present and beyond. This shadow does not darken history. Instead, it gives shape to it. Through Troy, humanity learned not only how wars are fought, but how they are remembered, justified, mourned, and slowly understood. At this final stage of reflection, the Trojan War exists almost entirely within human consciousness. It has moved beyond ruins and texts into something quieter and more enduring. It lives in patterns of thought, in cautionary instincts, and in the subtle awareness that great destruction often begins with small, ignored choices. Troy no longer warns loudly, it reminds gently. One of the most powerful legacies of the Trojan War is its role in shaping how humanity understands conflict itself. Before Troy, war was often imagined as a test of strength alone. After Troy, it became clear that war is also a test of restraint, wisdom, and foresight. The story showed that courage without reflection leads to ruin, and that intelligence without ethics becomes dangerous. These lessons slowly embedded themselves into political philosophy, literature, and moral thought. The Trojan War also transformed the idea of leadership. Kings and commanders in the story often failed not because they lacked power, but because they lacked humility. Agamemnon's authority collapsed under his pride. Priam's wisdom came too late. Even Achilles, unmatched in strength, could not escape the consequences of uncontrolled emotion. Through these figures, Troy taught that leadership demands self-awareness above all else. As centuries passed, societies began to recognize that the true victims of war are rarely those remembered by name. The Trojan War preserved the names of heroes, but it also hinted at countless forgotten lives. Modern interpretation brought these silent figures into focus. Children who never grew old, elders who watched traditions disappear, and ordinary people whose stories were never written. In this recognition, Troy became a voice for the unseen. The endurance of the Trojan War also lies in its refusal to offer simple moral conclusions. It does not divide the world neatly into good and evil. Both Greeks and Trojans are capable of honor and cruelty, wisdom and blindness. This moral complexity allows the story to remain relevant because it mirrors real human behavior more accurately than idealized myths. As humanity entered the modern age, the Trojan War began to influence discussions far beyond history and literature. It appeared in psychology as an early exploration of trauma. It appeared in politics as a warning against imperial overreach. It appeared in ethics as a case study in responsibility and consequence. Troy became a reference point whenever humans questioned their own actions. The idea of memory itself was reshaped by the Trojan War. The story demonstrated that remembering is not passive. Each retelling changes emphasis, revealing new meanings. Memory can glorify, but it can also heal. Over time, Troy shifted from a story of pride to a story of humility.
This transformation showed that how humanity remembers its past determines how it shapes its future. The Trojan horse, perhaps the most enduring image of the war, continued to evolve in meaning. In its final interpretation, it no longer symbolized cleverness alone, but self-deception. Troy fell because it wanted to believe the danger had passed. This lesson became increasingly relevant in a world where threats are often subtle and denial feels comforting. The horse reminded humanity that vigilance is an act of responsibility. Another lasting contribution of the Trojan War is its influence on storytelling itself. It established patterns still used today: interwoven perspectives, flawed heroes, unresolved endings. Modern narratives of war, loss, and identity owe much to Troy. The story taught that truth often emerges not from certainty, but from contradiction and tension. As global cultures interacted more closely, Troy became a shared human reference rather than a purely Greek one. Different societies recognized their own histories within it. Cities destroyed by war, peoples displaced by conquest, and generations shaped by loss all found echoes in Troy. This universality ensured that the Trojan War belonged to humanity as a whole. In education, the Trojan War gradually shifted from memorization to reflection. Students were encouraged to ask not what happened, but why it mattered. This change reflected a broader understanding of history as a guide rather than a record. Troy became a space for ethical exploration, where learners could examine ambition, loyalty, fear, and compassion. The calm tone that now surrounds the Trojan War is not a sign of forgetfulness, but of maturity. Humanity no longer needs to dramatize Troy to understand its importance. The story has settled into quiet relevance, offering insight without demanding attention. Its power lies in its patience. As Part 15 unfolds, the Trojan War feels almost complete, not because all questions are answered, but because the right questions remain. It teaches that wisdom is not the absence of conflict, but the ability to recognize its patterns early. Troy fell because humanity had not yet learned this skill. The story survives because humanity is still learning. The Trojan War also reminds us that civilizations are defined not by their rise alone, but by how they respond to decline. Troy's fall became meaningful because it was remembered, examined, and reinterpreted. Forgetting would have erased its lesson. Remembering transformed it into guidance. In the end, the Trojan War stands as one of humanity's earliest mirrors. It reflects ambition, fear, love, and loss without judgment. It does not demand that humanity be better, it simply shows what happens when humanity is not careful. This honesty gives the story its enduring strength. As this part draws toward its close, Troy exists no longer as a city or a battlefield, but as a presence within human thought. It appears in moments of decision, in pauses before action, and in reflections after loss. It reminds humanity that every choice carries weight, and every silence carries meaning. The Trojan War does not promise peace, but it offers awareness. It does not guarantee wisdom, but it invites it. In this invitation lies its greatest legacy. Thus, the story of Troy continues, not forward in time, but inward into understanding. As long as humanity remembers not just what was lost, but why it was lost, the Trojan War will remain relevant. The city fell long ago, but its lesson stands quietly beside humanity, waiting to be noticed. And in that quiet presence, the Trojan War endures, no longer as a tale of destruction, but as a guide toward reflection, restraint, and deeper human wisdom.